15th of September, 1940, 2:30 in the afternoon. The skies above southern England. Hauptmann Horst Tietzen pressed his eye against the reflector sight of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, watching the ungainly British fighter lumber through his gun sight. The Hurricane ahead flew in a straight line, its thick wings and bulbous fuselage making it look more like a transport than a fighter. Tietzen's lips curled into a smile beneath his oxygen mask. "Like shooting clay pigeons," he transmitted to his wingman, Lieutenant Werner Milders. "These English coffins barely stay in the air." The Luftwaffe had been hammering Britain for 6 weeks. German pilots, veterans of Poland, France, and the Low Countries, had developed a contemptuous nickname for the Hawker Hurricane. They called it the Fliegende Särge, the flying coffin. It was slower than their Messerschmitts. It couldn't dive as fast. Its fabric-covered wings seemed primitive compared to German all-metal construction. In dogfights over the Channel, the Hurricane appeared hopelessly outmatched. What Tietzen didn't know, what none of the Luftwaffe pilots circling above Kent that afternoon could have imagined, was that they were about to participate in the single bloodiest day in German Air Force history. Before sunset, 64 German aircraft would fall from British skies. The majority would be destroyed by the very fighters they'd mocked as flying coffins. The mathematics of annihilation were already in motion, and the Hurricane pilots waiting above had learned something the Germans were about to discover the hard way. The Hawker Hurricane hadn't been designed to be beautiful. It had been designed to kill. January 1935, Brooklands, Surrey, the Hawker Aircraft Design Office. Sidney Cam stood before his drawing board, studying the lines of his latest creation. As Hawker's chief designer, Cam had built his reputation on rugged, reliable aircraft. The Fury biplane fighter had been the fastest in the world when it entered service. But Cam knew the biplane's days were numbered. The Air Ministry wanted a modern monoplane fighter equipped with 8 machine guns. The specification seemed almost impossible. 8 guns meant tremendous weight. A monoplane meant higher wing loading than biplanes. Higher speed meant stronger construction. The design challenges were immense. Cam's solution was revolutionary in its practicality. Instead of pursuing theoretical perfection, he designed for production, maintenance, and pilot survival. The Hurricane would use a traditional structure, a steel tube framework with fabric-covered wings and fuselage. This seemed primitive compared to all-metal stressed skin designs, but it had profound advantages. The prototype first flew on 6th of November, 1935. Test pilot George Bullman pushed the aircraft through its paces, then delivered his verdict. "She's a bit heavy in the controls, but by God, she's solid. You could fly this thing through a brick wall and probably survive." That comment would prove prophetic. The production Hurricane that entered RAF service in December 1937 represented the first modern monoplane fighter in British service. Powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 1,030 horsepower, it could reach 324 miles per hour in level flight. More importantly, it carried 8 Browning .303 machine guns in the wings, each loaded with 334 rounds. That's 2,672 bullets, giving a firing time of about 16 seconds. Flight Lieutenant Paul Ritchie, who would become one of the Hurricane's most successful pilots, first climbed into the cockpit in March 1939. His initial impression was underwhelming. Coming from a Gladiator biplane to the Hurricane was like moving from a motorcycle to a lorry, he later wrote. She felt heavy and sluggish on the controls. The visibility wasn't brilliant. The cockpit was cramped and hot. I wondered how on earth we were supposed to fight the Messerschmitt in this thing. Then Ritchie fired the guns. I pressed the button and the whole aircraft shook. 8 streams of tracer converged about 300 yards ahead. Where they intersected, the target drone simply disintegrated. Not damaged, obliterated. That's when I understood. This wasn't a fighter designed to dance with the enemy. It was designed to destroy him. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, the RAF had 13 squadrons equipped with Hurricanes. Another 6 had Spitfires. The rest still flew biplanes. Britain's fighter force was desperately undermanned and under-equipped for what was coming. The fall of France in June 1940 exposed Britain to direct attack. The Luftwaffe, fresh from victories across Europe, prepared for the knockout blow. German intelligence estimated Britain had fewer than 700 fighters. They believed half could be destroyed in the first week of concentrated attacks. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was confident. His pilots flew the best fighters in the world. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E could reach 357 miles per hour. It could climb faster than the Hurricane. It could dive faster. In energy fighting, using speed and altitude advantage, it was superior. More importantly, German pilots were experienced. Many had fought in Spain. All had combat experience from Poland and France. They'd faced Polish P-11s, French Morane Saulniers, and even some RAF Hurricanes over France. The verdict was unanimous. German fighters were superior. Oberleutnant Franz von Vera, a Bf-109 pilot with Jagdgeschwader 3, wrote to his family in July 1940, "The English Hurricane is a joke. Fat, slow, covered in fabric like a tiger moth trainer. Our 109s run circles around them. When the real battle starts, it will be a turkey shoot." The real battle was about to start. 10th of July, 1940, the official start of the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe opened with probing attacks against Channel convoys. Hurricanes of No. 32 and No. 111 squadrons scrambled to intercept German bombers attacking a convoy off Dover. The British pilots discovered immediately that fighting the Messerschmitt required different tactics than anything they'd trained for. Squadron leader John Worrell led 6 Hurricanes from No. 32 Squadron into combat that morning. They climbed to intercept a formation of Dornier de 17 bombers escorted by Bf-109s. The Messerschmitts dove on the climbing Hurricanes before they could reach the bombers. Worrell's combat report filed that evening was sobering. Enemy fighters engaged us from above. They held speed and altitude advantage throughout. We could not catch the ones that dove away. However, when enemy aircraft committed to turning combat, our aircraft proved superior in maneuverability. Pilot Officer Grice destroyed one Me-109 in a turning engagement. The enemy aircraft attempted to dive away, but Grice remained in firing position throughout the turn, and his guns struck the engine. Enemy aircraft crashed in flames near Folkestone. The pattern was set. In straight line speed and climbing, the Messerschmitt held advantage. In turning combat, the Hurricane could keep its guns on target longer. The question was whether Hurricane pilots could force the Germans into the type of fight where British advantages mattered. The Luftwaffe didn't think it would matter. German tactical doctrine emphasized energy fighting. Dive, shoot, climb away. Never get slow, never turn with the enemy, maintain speed advantage. This doctrine had worked against every opponent they'd faced. Major Werner Milders, one of Germany's leading aces with 14 victories, issued tactical guidance to his pilots. Against the Hurricane, maintain altitude and speed advantage. Attack from above and behind. Fire a quick burst and dive away before they can respond. Never, under any circumstances, allow yourself to be drawn into a turning engagement. Their only advantage is in the turn. Deny them that advantage and they're helpless. It was sound advice, but it required discipline, and it required that bombers wouldn't need close escort. The first major daylight raids began on 13th of August, which the Germans called Adlertag, Eagle Day. The Luftwaffe launched over 1,400 sorties against British airfields and ports. They expected to encounter perhaps 200 RAF fighters. Instead, they faced 670 defensive sorties. The numbers shocked German intelligence. Where were all these British fighters coming from? The answer was simple. German intelligence had drastically underestimated RAF strength. More importantly, they'd underestimated the Hurricane. Of the 670 British fighter sorties flown on Eagle Day, 500 were Hurricanes. The Spitfire got the glory and the headlines, but the Hurricane did the killing. Pilot Officer Dennis David of No. 87 Squadron engaged a formation of Junkers Ju-88 bombers that afternoon over Portsmouth. His Hurricane was hit by return fire from the bombers, fabric ripping from his port wing. The aircraft shook violently but remained controllable. "I closed to 100 yards and fired a 4-second burst," David reported. All 8 guns converging on the bomber's starboard engine. The engine immediately caught fire and the wing folded upward. The bomber went down spinning. I noticed significant fabric damage to my own wing, but the aircraft handled normally. I remained on patrol for another 20 minutes before returning to base. David's Hurricane was repaired overnight by ground crew who patched the fabric. checked the structure, and declared it ready for operations the next morning. A metal aircraft with similar damage would have required days of work. The Hurricane's old-fashioned construction proved remarkably easy to repair. By mid-August, the pattern was clear. The Luftwaffe was losing more aircraft than expected. Much of the attrition came from Hurricane squadrons that German intelligence had discounted as obsolete. Hauptmann Hannes Trautloft, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 54, noted in his diary, "The English Hurricane is tougher than we thought. Oberleutnant Keller put 30 cannon shells into one yesterday. The fabric was hanging off in strips, but the damn thing kept flying. It turned inside him, and its guns shredded his cooling system. He barely made it back across the channel. These fabric-covered fighters are proving surprisingly difficult to kill." The Hurricane's construction absorbed damage that would destroy all metal aircraft. The steel tube framework could survive hits that would catastrophically fail stressed metal skin. The fabric covering, while seemingly primitive, meant cannon shells often passed through without transferring energy to vital structure. Pilots reported aircraft returning with hundreds of bullet holes, the fabric looking like Swiss cheese, but the internal structure intact. More than durability, the Hurricane pilots were learning how to use their aircraft effectively. The 8 machine guns, while lacking the hitting power of cannons, created a cone of fire that was nearly impossible to evade. German pilots who had survived Hurricane attacks described flying through a wall of tracers. Oberfeldwebel Franz Heiler, forced to bail out over Kent on 18th of August, told his RAF interrogators, "I was attacking a bomber when 2 Hurricanes appeared. I thought I could outdive them. I pushed the nose down and opened the throttle fully. Then I heard the sound, like hail on a tin roof. Their bullets were hitting everywhere. My cockpit exploded. The windscreen shattered. The controls went dead. I was doing 600 kilometers per hour when I had to bail out. I thought I was safe in a dive. I was wrong." The Luftwaffe was learning a hard lesson. The Hurricane might be slower and less maneuverable than the 109 in some regimes, but in the grinding attrition of bomber escort duty, where German fighters had to stay with slow bombers and couldn't use their speed advantage, the British fighter was deadly. By early September, the Luftwaffe had lost over 400 aircraft. German intelligence insisted the RAF must be on its last legs. Goering ordered a change in strategy. Instead of attacking airfields and radar stations, the Luftwaffe would attack London directly. The massive daylight raids would force the RAF to commit its last reserves. The German fighters would destroy them. It was a fatal miscalculation. The RAF had been hurt badly. Pilot casualties were severe. Aircraft losses were significant. Several forward airfields were temporarily unusable, but fighter command was far from defeated. More importantly, by switching to London attacks, the Luftwaffe was playing to British strengths. London could be defended by the entire fighter force operating from inland airfields beyond German bomber range. The RAF could mass its squadrons, achieving local numerical superiority. And the German bombers would be flying deep into British airspace, giving fighter pilots multiple opportunities to attack. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commanding No. 11 Group, which defended London, issued new tactical instructions. Hurricane squadrons would focus on the bombers. Spitfire squadrons would engage the fighter escorts. This played to each aircraft's strengths. The Hurricane's heavy armament against large targets, the Spitfire's performance against enemy fighters. But Park knew something else. When Hurricane pilots got among the bombers, German fighter pilots faced an impossible choice: stay with the bombers and accept combat at low speed where the Hurricane was deadliest, or abandon the bombers to chase Spitfires and leave the bombers vulnerable. Saturday, 7th of September, 1940, 4:30 in the afternoon. The first massive raid on London. 348 German bombers escorted by 617 fighters crossed the channel in waves. It was the largest air attack ever launched against a city. 21 RAF squadrons scrambled to intercept. 14 were equipped with Hurricanes. The British pilots climbed toward the Armada, knowing they were outnumbered but determined to break up the formations before they could bomb London's docks. Squadron leader Douglas Bader led No. 242 Squadron directly into a formation of Dornier Do-17 bombers over the Thames estuary. The Hurricanes ignored the Messerschmitt escorts diving on them, focusing on the bombers. Close to 200 yards before firing, Bader transmitted, "Make every bullet count. The Hurricane's 8 guns. produced a combined rate of fire of about 10,000 rounds per minute when fired together. At 200 yards, the cone of fire was roughly 15 feet in diameter. A bomber flying through that cone faced 60 bullets per second striking its airframe. Bader's first burst hit a Dornier in the port wing root. The bomber's fuel tank exploded, and the aircraft broke in half. His second burst caught another Dornier in the cockpit area. The nose dropped, and the bomber entered a steep dive, streaming smoke. Behind him, 11 more Hurricanes were tearing into the bomber formation. The Germans broke formation, individual aircraft taking evasive action. The tight defensive boxes they'd practiced over Germany dissolved into scattered individual aircraft, each fighting for survival. The Messerschmitt escorts, seeing the bombers under attack, abandoned their high cover positions and dove to help. This brought them down to the Hurricane's altitude, exactly where the British fighters wanted them. Flight Lieutenant Robert Stanford Tuck of No. 257 Squadron found himself facing a Bf-109 head-on. The German pilot fired first, his cannon shells passing wide. Tuck held steady until 100 yards, then pressed the firing button. 8 streams of tracer converged on the Messerschmitt's nose. The German fighter's propeller disintegrated, the engine seized, and the aircraft dropped away trailing smoke. The head-on attack worked because we had 8 guns, and they typically had 2 cannons and 2 machine guns. Tuck later explained, "Our cone of fire was wider. Even if our aim was slightly off, we hit them. Their fire was more concentrated, but had to be more precise. In a head-on pass lasting 2 seconds, precision was nearly impossible." The raid succeeded in bombing London's docks, causing terrible destruction. But the Luftwaffe lost 41 aircraft that day. The RAF lost 28 fighters but saved 23 pilots. The exchange rate was tilting toward the British. More ominously for Germany, bomber crews returning from London reported intense defensive fire from British fighters. Several crews reported being attacked by 6 or more Hurricanes simultaneously. They described the British fighters as aggressive, pressing attacks to point-blank range regardless of return fire. Lieutenant Wilhelm Rabe, a Heinkel H-111 pilot, wrote in his diary, "We were told the British were down to their last fighters. Today, we faced more than ever. The Hurricanes came straight through our fighter escort like it wasn't there. They focused entirely on us bombers. Their fire was devastating. The aircraft beside us exploded. The one behind us went down in flames. We were hit 20 times but made it home. I don't know how many more missions we can survive." The Luftwaffe's morale was beginning to crack. These weren't supposed to be the battles of a defeated Air Force making its last stand. This was supposed to be a walkover against an exhausted enemy. Instead, every raid faced intense opposition, and those supposedly obsolete British fighters were killing Germans in shocking numbers. The Hurricane's effectiveness came from understanding its role. British pilots weren't trying to dogfight Messerschmitts. They were trying to destroy bombers. The aircraft was optimized for that mission. The 8 machine guns, while individually less powerful than cannons, had several advantages. They never jammed. The ammunition load of 334 rounds per gun meant 16 seconds of firing time, an eternity in combat. The rate of fire meant even a 1-second burst put 80 bullets into the target zone. More importantly, the guns were harmonized to converge at a specific point, typically 250 yards. At that convergence point, all 8 streams of bullets intersected in a space about 10 feet in diameter. Any aircraft in that zone faced approximately 50 bullets per second. Sergeant Pilot Cyril Bamberger of No. 601 Squadron described the effect. You'd close to about 200 yards, line up the reflector sight on the bomber's engine, and press the button. The whole aircraft would shake from the recoil. You'd see the tracers, 1 in every 5 rounds, walking across the target. Then you'd see pieces flying off. Sometimes the engine would catch fire immediately. Other times the wing would just fold up. The 8 guns together were like a giant shotgun blast. Very effective. The Hurricane also had excellent low-speed handling. While this made it vulnerable in high-speed combat against Messerschmitts, it made it deadly against bombers. Hurricane pilots could slow down to match the bomber's speed, making it easier to aim. The stable gun platform and long firing time meant they could correct their aim during the burst. German bomber crews learned to fear the Hurricane more than the Spitfire. The Spitfire was faster and might damage your aircraft. The Hurricane stayed with you until you were destroyed. Feldwebel Heinz Mikulasch, a Junkers Jew 88 gunner shot down on September 12th, told his interrogators. The Spitfire would make a fast pass, fire a quick burst, then zoom away. We could survive that. The Hurricane was different. It would slide in behind us, match our speed exactly, and just keep firing. Our gunners would hit it repeatedly, but it kept coming. It was like fighting a tank that could fly. When you saw a Hurricane lock onto you, you knew you were probably dead. The aircraft's rugged construction contributed to its fearsome reputation. Hurricanes routinely returned to base with damage that should have been fatal. Ground crews became accustomed to seeing aircraft land with cylinders shot off the engine, control surfaces shredded, and fuselage fabric hanging in strips. Flight Sergeant William Rolls landed at Biggin Hill on September 9th with his starboard wing torn open by cannon fire. The metal leading edge was gone, exposing the internal structure. 3 ribs were broken. The fabric covering flapped in the wind, yet the aircraft flew normally enough to land safely. The crew chief looked at my wing and went white, Rolls recalled. He said any other aircraft would have had the wing fail, but the Hurricane's structure was so overbuilt that even with massive damage, the remaining structure was still strong enough. They patched it up overnight, and I flew it again the next morning. This combination, devastating firepower, stable gun platform, and incredible durability, made the Hurricane an ideal bomber-destroyer. What it lacked in glamour and performance compared to the Spitfire, it compensated for with sheer effectiveness at its assigned mission. By mid-September, the Luftwaffe had lost over 600 aircraft. German bomber crews were increasingly reluctant to fly daylight missions. Fighter pilots, initially confident, were reporting that British resistance was strengthening rather than weakening. The supposedly obsolete Hurricane was destroying German aircraft at an alarming rate. Goering was furious. He accused his fighter pilots of cowardice, of failing to protect the bombers. Major Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top aces, defended his men. The problem wasn't cowardice. The problem was that escorting slow bombers deep into British airspace nullified the Messerschmitt's advantages while maximizing the Hurricane's strengths. We cannot fight the British fighters while staying close to the bombers, Galen argued. The British Hurricanes ignore us and go straight for the bombers. If we chase them, we leave the bombers undefended. If we stay close, we must fight at slow speed where the Hurricane is most effective. It's an impossible situation. Goering's response was to order even larger raids. Overwhelming numbers would succeed where tactical superiority had failed. He ordered the largest single daylight raid of the war. It would target London with devastating force. It would be escorted by every available fighter, and it would finally break the RAF. He chose Sunday, 15th of September, 1940. The German plan was simple through overwhelming force. 2 massive waves would attack London in daylight. The morning raid would involve 248 bombers with over 600 fighters. If the RAF rose to meet them, they'd be destroyed. If they didn't, London would be devastated. After the RAF expended itself against the morning raid, a second wave in the afternoon would finish the job. Another 300 bombers with 400 fighters. 2 massive raids in one day. It would be the knockout blow. What the Germans didn't know was that Fighter Command had been carefully husbanding its resources. Park had pulled back some squadrons to rebuild. Others had been rotated to quieter sectors for rest. The constant pressure had been exhausting, but it hadn't broken Fighter Command's ability to fight. More importantly, the RAF had the advantage of fighting over home territory. Damaged aircraft could land at any of dozens of airfields. Pilots who bailed out would be back in action within days. German pilots who went down over England were lost. Damaged German aircraft had to cross the channel. Many didn't make it. 11th of September at 11:30 in the morning, the first German formations crossed the English coast near Dover. British radar had tracked them assembling over France for 40 minutes. Every available squadron was already airborne and climbing into position. 23 RAF squadrons rose to meet the attack. 17 were Hurricanes. They focused entirely on the bombers, leaving the Messerschmitts to the 6 Spitfire squadrons. Squadron leader Brian Lane led No. 19 Squadron into a formation of Dornier Du 17S over Canterbury. His Spitfires engaged the fighter escort, drawing off the Messerschmitts. This opened a gap for the Hurricanes. No. 242 Squadron, led by Douglas Bader, exploited the gap immediately. 12 Hurricanes dove on the bombers from ahead and above, making head-on attacks that scattered the German formation. Behind them came No. 302 Squadron, a Polish unit flying Hurricanes attacking from the port side. Then No. 305, another Polish squadron from starboard. The Germans found themselves under attack from 3 directions simultaneously. Fighter escorts raced back but arrived too late. The damage was done. Flight Lieutenant Jan Zumbach, a Polish pilot with No. 303 Squadron, described the attack. "We came in fast from their left side. The bombers were trying to close up their formation after the head-on attack disrupted them. I selected the rearmost bomber in the left section, close to 100 yards, fired a 4-second burst. My tracers converged on his port engine. It exploded immediately. The whole wing was on fire. The bomber rolled inverted and went straight down. The morning raid lost 25 bombers and 5 fighters before reaching London. Another 13 bombers were so badly damaged they crashed on the return flight or made emergency landings in France. The Germans had expected minimal resistance. Instead, they faced the most intense defensive effort of the entire battle. But the real killing was yet to come. At 2 in the afternoon, the second wave approached. 300 bombers, mostly Heinkel He-111s and Dornier Du 17s, escorted by 400 Messerschmitt 109s. It was the largest single formation the Luftwaffe had ever assembled. Every RAF fighter that could fly was scrambled. 31 squadrons rose to meet them. 23 were Hurricanes. This time, Park deployed them in coordinated attacks. Squadrons would hit the bombers in waves one after another, giving the Germans no respite. The first contact came over Maidstone at 20,000 feet. No. 249 Squadron, leading the attack, dove through the fighter screen. Their Hurricanes' 8 guns tore into a formation of Heinkel bombers. 3 Heinkels went down immediately, trailing fire and smoke. The rest scattered. Before the Germans could reform, No. 501 Squadron attacked from the opposite direction. Then No. 303. Then No. 257. The attacks came in rapid succession, each hitting a different part of the bomber stream, keeping the Germans disorganized and defensive. Hauptmann Joachim Helbig, leading a group of Heinkel 111s, radioed desperately for fighter support. "We are under constant attack. Fighters everywhere. My formation is scattered. I count 6 aircraft burning. Need escort immediately." The Messerschmitt escorts were trying, but there weren't enough of them to protect the entire bomber stream. When they converged on one area to drive off Hurricanes, another squadron would attack unprotected bombers elsewhere. The German formation, so neat over France, had dissolved into ragged groups of bombers fighting for survival. Over London itself, the slaughter intensified. Fresh Hurricane squadrons rose from airfields around the capital, climbing directly into the bomber stream. No. 17 Squadron caught a group of Dorniers over the Thames. All 8 aircraft of Red Section attacked simultaneously, their guns firing in unison. Pilot officer Count Manfred Chernin, a Czech pilot with No. 17 Squadron, described it. "We hit them with everything at once. 8 Hurricanes, 64 machine guns, all firing at the same formation. It was systematic destruction. Their bombers started exploding before they could drop their loads. I saw one bomber with both engines on fire trying to turn away. It exploded in midair, just a massive orange fireball. Pieces fell like snow over the city." The afternoon raid lost 39 bombers and 15 fighters. Combined with the morning losses, the Germans had lost 64 aircraft in a single day. The RAF lost 29 aircraft but saved 20 pilots, 64 aircraft. It was the bloodiest day the Luftwaffe had ever experienced. The following morning, German reconnaissance aircraft reported something impossible. British airfields showed no signs of devastation. Fighters were visibly dispersed on grass strips. The RAF was still operational. In Berlin, Hitler demanded answers. He'd been promised that Britain was on its knees, that one more push would finish them. Instead, German losses were mounting while British resistance strengthened. Göring initially blamed his fighter pilots, but the bomber crews told a different story. They described facing dozens of British fighters. They reported the aggressive tactics of Hurricane pilots who pressed attacks to point-blank range. They confirmed that British fighters appeared in greater numbers than German intelligence believed existed. The truth was simple and devastating. German intelligence had consistently underestimated RAF strength. They dismissed the Hurricane as obsolete, and they'd failed to account for British production, which was replacing losses faster than Germany could inflict them. More profoundly, they'd misunderstood the nature of the battle. This wasn't about which fighter was faster or could turn tighter. It was about whether the Luftwaffe could destroy British industrial capacity and break civilian morale. To do that, they needed to bomb successfully, and the Hurricane was purpose-built to prevent exactly that. The flying coffin, it turned out, was better at putting Germans in coffins than the other way around. 2 days after the massacre of the 15th, Hitler postponed the invasion of Britain indefinitely. The Luftwaffe hadn't achieved air superiority. Without it, Operation Sea Lion was impossible. Germany would look east to Russia for victory. The Battle of Britain continued at lower intensity through October, but the crisis had passed. The Luftwaffe shifted increasingly to night bombing, where they suffered fewer losses but accomplished less. The daytime battle, where the Hurricane proved its worth, was over. Final statistics from the Battle of Britain reveal the Hurricane's decisive role. Of 1,744 confirmed German aircraft destroyed, Hurricane pilots claimed 65%, approximately 1,150 victories. Spitfires, despite receiving most of the publicity, accounted for only 35%. The Hurricane equipped 32 squadrons during the battle, compared to 19 Spitfire squadrons. Hurricane pilots bore the brunt of the fighting, facing the majority of bomber formations. And they paid a heavy price. 544 Hurricanes were lost in combat, but their crews destroyed nearly 3 German aircraft for every Hurricane lost. Oberleutnant Julius Neumann, forced to bail out over Kent on September 26th, summarized the German experience in his interrogation. "We were told the Hurricane was obsolete, that it was easy prey for our 109s. This was a fatal lie. Yes, the 109 could outperform the Hurricane in some respects, but that didn't matter. The Hurricane was built for one job, destroying bombers, and at that job, it was the most effective aircraft in the sky. Those 8 guns were devastating. The aircraft was incredibly tough, and the pilots were fearless. They'd fly straight through our fighter screen to get at the bombers. We called it a flying coffin. The coffin was ours, not theirs." After the war, German pilots consistently identified the Hurricane as one of the most underrated aircraft they'd faced. Its lack of glamour compared to the Spitfire had obscured its effectiveness. But to German bomber crews who'd faced it in battle, there was nothing obsolete about the Hurricane. The aircraft continued in frontline service long after the Battle of Britain. Improved versions fought in North Africa, where Pierre Clostermann, a French pilot with the RAF, described it as an infantryman's fighter, not flashy but utterly reliable and deadly in the right hands. Hurricanes flew in the Battle of Malta, where they faced Italian and German aircraft over the besieged island. They fought in the Far East against the Japanese, though with less success due to the Zero's superior maneuverability. They served as tank busters in Russia, equipped with 40mm cannons that could penetrate German armor. By the war's end, over 14,500 Hurricanes had been built. It was the most numerous British fighter of the entire war. Yet it remained in the shadow of the more glamorous Spitfire, despite arguably being more important to Britain's survival in 1940. The transformation of the Hurricane from flying coffin to war-winning weapon system reveals a profound truth about aerial warfare. Technical superiority matters less than effective employment. The Hurricane wasn't the fastest fighter or the most maneuverable, but it was tough, reliable, heavily armed, and flown by determined pilots who understood how to maximize its strengths. On that bloody 15th of September, when 64 German aircraft fell from British skies, the majority were destroyed by aircraft German pilots had dismissed as obsolete. The joke, as it turned out, was on the Luftwaffe. The flying coffin had buried them. The Hurricane's triumph in the Battle of Britain established principles that would dominate aerial warfare for the rest of the conflict. Raw performance mattered less than reliability, firepower, and numbers. Pilot training and tactical employment could overcome technical disadvantage. And industrial capacity, the ability to replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them, was ultimately decisive. Sidney Cam, the Hurricane's designer, never sought glory. He continued working on aircraft designs throughout the war, including the Typhoon and Tempest fighters that would prove devastating in ground attack roles. But he took quiet satisfaction in knowing his ungainly fabric-covered fighter had saved Britain. Everyone wanted to fly Spitfires, Cam remarked in a 1953 interview. The Hurricane was never the glamorous choice, but talk to the pilots who flew both in combat, and most will tell you the Hurricane was the better gun platform, easier to maintain, and more survivable when damaged. It won the Battle of Britain not because it was better than the Messerschmitt in all parameters, but because it was better at the one thing that mattered most, destroying German bombers. The German pilots who survived the battle carried respect for the Hurricane for the rest of their lives. In post-war reunions with RAF veterans, they consistently asked about the sturdy British fighter that had shattered their confidence. At a 1965 gathering in London, Adolf Galland met Douglas Bader, his former adversary. The two men, both aces, both leaders, discussed the battle they'd fought a quarter-century earlier. "Your Hurricane was the better bomber-destroyer," Galland admitted. "Our mistake was thinking that because the 109 had better performance in some areas, we were superior in all circumstances. We learned that performance means nothing if you can't bring your strengths to bear. You forced us to fight where the Hurricane was strongest. That was brilliant tactics compensating for technical limitations." Bader smiled. "We didn't have technical limitations. We had a different design philosophy. The Hurricane was built to do one job superbly rather than many jobs adequately. On 15th September 1940, when we needed to stop your bombers or lose London, it was exactly the right tool for exactly the right job." That day, Battle of Britain Day, as it became known, remains commemorated in Britain every 15th of September. The victory marked the first major defeat of Nazi Germany. It proved that the Wehrmacht could be stopped, and it gave Britain the breathing space to survive until America entered the war. At the center of that victory was an aircraft that German pilots had mocked as a flying coffin, an aircraft designed with practicality over elegance, an aircraft that prioritized firepower and durability over speed and maneuverability, an aircraft that did one thing brilliantly well, and did it at the moment when Britain needed it most. The 64 German aircraft lost on 15th September 1940 represented more than statistics. They represented the destruction of Luftwaffe confidence, the shattering of the myth of German invincibility, and the salvation of British democracy. And they proved that sometimes the ungainly, underestimated, seemingly obsolete weapon is exactly what wins wars. The Hawker Hurricane was never the most beautiful fighter. It was never the fastest or most maneuverable. But on the day when it mattered most, when German bombers darkened British skies and invasion threatened, the flying coffin proved whose funeral it was really attending. The answer was written in smoke trails over London, in burning wrecks across Kent and Sussex, and in 64 fewer German aircraft flying home to France. The coffin was German. The Hurricane was the pallbearer, and Britain survived to fight another day.